here we are with round 1, and what you might notice is that I've got the replay function up. I found that at parts in some of these matches I was spending a lot of time thinking, or my opponent was, and people were inactive, not at their computer, didn't make for good viewing. I thought rather than waste your time, I'd waste my own. I'd go back and re-record these replays, and I'd talk through what I was thinking about as we go through. So, if we go step by step, my opponent wins the die roll, decides to play first, and this is my opening hand. Now, I've got 2 lands, and I've got a couple of draw spells and a few disruption spells. I don't have a threat. I'm a bit unsure as to whether I should keep these or not. This was partly a bit of a trial. It's difficult to mulligan. It's obviously not a great hand. If I had Delver of Secrets over any one of these spells, I'd probably be very, very happy. You can't really mulligan this sort of thing, though. My opponent goes to 6, puts a card on the bottom, and opens with an Eldrazi Temple. So I immediately know my opponent's on the new Eldrazi decks. I don't know if they're mono-black. They might be black-white. The black-white decks are better against me because of Lingering Souls. But these decks, especially with Eye of Ugin and Reality Smasher, these decks sort of have inevitability. You have to kill them. So my hand doesn't look so terrific, actually. Spell Pierce is going to disrupt a spell, but I just want to be able to get the pressure on my opponent. I draw a Remand, which is fine, but rather than hope I can Spell Pierce something on turn 2, I figure I might as well Serum Visions. Now my opponent doesn't really have turn 2 plays that a Spell Pierce would affect. If they had a Relic of Progenitus or a Expedition map, they would have cast it already, I suspect. More likely is they've got creatures like Wasteland Strangler or Thought-Knot Seer that they're building up to, and so this turn's definitely just going to be about casting Serum Visions and looking at what I got. So I draw an island, and I see Young Pyromancer and Delver of Secrets, both terrific cards, both ways to match up with this hand to win the game. As I said, I needed a threat. These are the ones for me. I elect to keep both, getting the Delver of Secrets next turn. I just want a bit of a backup. My opponent does play removal spells. If they do kill the Delver, I want the Young Pyromancer. Both are fine cards, so I put Pyromancer on top, Delver on top of that, pass the turn. My opponent does not play a land after drawing their card. They did mulligan, and when they mulliganed, they put a card on the bottom, so I think they're a bit land shy. I draw my Delver. I don't want to shuffle the Young Pyromancer away, so I'm going to make this island, make a Delver, and keep up Spell Pierce or Vapor Snag. I don't need to cast my Serum Visions. I know the top card. There's no point in exposing it to a Thoughtseize or an Inquisition of Kozilek in case my opponent draws black mana. So Delver of Secrets, and end of turn my opponent pays 4 life, which is wonderful for me. That's exactly what I'm hoping happens in the game, and tries to dismember. So this Spell Pierce is essentially a Lava Spike that makes my opponent discard a card. Wonderful. My opponent on their turn draws and plays a Mutavault, and with their 3 colours mana makes a Matter Reshaper. Now I know the top card of my library is this Young Pyromancer, so I'm not going to be able to flip and fly over it. But at the very least, I can crack my Polluted Delta for a red mana, make my Young Pyromancer, and there's 2 options: using Vapor Snag here on the Matter Reshaper, or casting Serum Visions. Now, as you can see, I elect to do the Vapor Snag. The reason is I can get in damage with the Delver of Secrets this turn. I make more tokens, protects me against removal spells. Serum Visions would do that as well. But the Vapor Snag just means that even if my opponent does play draw and play another land, they're only going to have one thing on the field. So it's going to make sure my opponent's not got anything on the battlefield, just helps me get in the damage here and there. If I Serum Visions and my opponent draws and plays a Thought-Knot Seer, I'm going to look kind of foolish. So my opponent gets a Mutavault, does indeed make a Thought-Knot Seer, but that's okay. My opponent takes my Remand, which I'm a bit intrigued about, because actually that means my Lightning Bolt can team up with an Elemental. This Thought-Knot Seer can't really block very effectively. Now, my Delver of Secrets reveals a Vapor Snag, which is obviously wonderful. I would like to reveal that card. I draw the Vapor Snag and snag the Thought-Knot Seer. Like I said, get in the damage. I'm going to snag it and attack in for a bunch of damage. Now my Serum Visions reveals a Spell Snare which I put on the bottom. This Eldrazi deck doesn't really play too many 2 mana cost spells, so Spell Snare is a very dead card. One of the great things about Serum Visions is that you get to push these dead cards to the bottom. Grim Lavamancer, kind of slow, not amazing, but it will help me deal damage, and that's what I need, so I leave that one on top. Attack in with my Insect Aberration and my Elemental, since my opponent cannot block. And pass the turn. My opponent's on 10. Oh, I guess I make a tap land. No, I can cast both my spells. My opponent's on 10. I've got a Flyer, and another 4 points of burn in hand. So I'm getting my opponent very close to dead. They decide not to carry on, and so I win the game. Now, in terms of my sideboard, my spell snares, like I said, are dead. My spell pierce is mostly dead. The Eldrazi Temples and the Eye of Ugins don't help the pay for this cost, but there's just not many things that are very expensive that this counters. I got quite lucky on the Dismember that last game. So I'm going to take these 3 spells out, bring in 2 Molten Rain and a Shadow of Doubt. Molten Rain great against Eldrazi Temple, and Shadow of Doubt, they have Expedition Map, they have Eye of Ugin, and at the very worst it draws a card, so it could be worse. Going into the game, I won the first game, so my opponent is on the play, and my first hand has one of the Molten Rains, a Young Pyromancer, Snapcaster, Remand, 3 lands. Again, it's a keep, it's not tremendous. It's not really going to do anything until my opponent's turn 3, but I'm not going to mulligan it because it does do something. My opponent leads on Blinkmoth Nexus, which isn't one a card I've seen very much in these sorts of decks. That tells me they're definitely not on the black-white version. This is almost certainly a black version, or even quite heavily colourless, to be honest. Last game we saw from my opponent Eldrazi Temple and 2 Mutavault, so I haven't seen any coloured mana. They tend to play black. I'm fairly certain it's going to have black mana in. So my opponent makes Expedition Map. I draw a Snapcaster Mage, which isn't exciting. I could even consider running out at the end of turn 2 if I don't need to use that Remand. My opponent makes a Mutavault and doesn't attack. They're planning on Expedition Map, so I crack my fetch for a Steam Vent. I still have Blood Moon in my deck, but I've got access to another basic island in hand, so there's no point, and I do need to get second red for this Molten Rain, so there's no point fetching out basic islands just yet. I draw a basic island, I make my mountain, which may be a mistake. I possibly could have played the Remand, but it's not going to make too much difference. My opponent cracks the map for Eldrazi Temple, I believe, and that's the one I will Molten Rain on my turn if it gets to it. Well, it will get to my turn, of course, but my opponent tries to use that 4 mana, and I Remand. So I was lucky that my opponent didn't have one of these hands where they can do Thoughtseize and Relic Progenitus early on. Instead, they were hoping on doing stuff from turn 3, which Remand is great against. I draw a Mana Leak, which is good. There's no point in Molten Raining this turn, because I'm going to Mana Leak whatever they do, and then I can Molten Rain next turn, if need be. Because if they just play another Eldrazi Temple or an Eye of Ugin, they can do the Thought-Knot Seer, and then I'm going to die to that thing. So they draw Urborg, which means they probably are the black mana version. This actually turns on my Scalding Tarn Swamp. One neat trick is I might not, if I don't need to crack that for mana, because I do kind of want to draw a 5th mana so I can Snapcaster a Molten Rain. I don't need to crack that just yet. I can maximise the chances of drawing a land by leaving it in play. My opponent has a Reality Smasher, which is a very strong card actually. Very difficult to deal with, especially because a lot of the ways my deck deals with creatures is through Lightning Bolt or Vapor Snag, and they're really inefficient against Reality Smasher, so very lucky to have one of my 2 mana leaks in hand at this point. Of course I have a Deprive, which I could fetch the island off Scalding Tarn, but not many answers. Lucky to have one just then. Delver of Secrets means I can do Molten Rain and make a threat, so that's the most efficient use of my mana. I nuke the Eldrazi Temple, make a Delver of Secrets. My opponent plays a Wastes and has a Chalice of the Void for 1. Now this card is strong against my deck, especially because I haven't got any artifact removal. However, it's not strong against my hand. My hand is strong against Chalice of the Void. That was essentially not a very big use of a turn. They could easily have made Thought-Knot Seer on this turn, and that would have been much more effective, as it happened. Now, there's no way for my opponent to know that, but it worked out quite well for me. My opponent uses Warping Whale to exile my Delver of Secrets. So I do need to get something going. Ideally, I draw a land here, and then I can Snapcast a Molten Rain. Oh look, I drew a land, and I don't have to crack it, although at this point I could if I wanted to. Since I don't need any more swamps, I could just fetch the basics out of my deck. So, snap Molten Rain, nuke the... what did I go for? I think I went for the Urborg. I went for the Urborg to get my opponent off black mana, which means I will need to crack these swamps, but my opponent doesn't have black mana. I couldn't cut them off colourless, I can cut them off black mana. So I'm not doing the best job at killing my opponent. If you look, the only damage they've taken is 4 off of my Molten Rain twice. They're on 16. So I will need to... I don't look like I'm in the best shape. I will need to step that up a bit, but my opponent's not got many resources. So Matter Reshaper comes down. And actually at this point I don't feel like I'm winning the game, really. These spells are going to get countered. I've got some creatures, but they can't really attack past Matter Reshaper. Honestly, this isn't amazing. I'm going to need a few things to go well for me. So I make my Young Pyromancer, I cast the Probe for mana, because since I can't do Snapcaster and recast a spell anyway, I may as well just pay the mana rather than pay the life, just to get my token. My opponent doesn't draw a land, so I've successfully gotten down on the lands that they have in play, but they do cast a Titan's Presence. Titan's Presence, unusual tech. It's exile the creature if it's less than the revealed creature's power. They revealed a... it doesn't say it here, but they revealed a Thought Not Seer, the one that I remanded on turn 3. I decided to Lightning Bolt just to get the mana. I've only got a mountain in... I've already got my only basic mountain in play, so it does cost me a bit of life, but the 1/1 might end up being more important. And then I figure I might as well crack for my last Steam Vents just to get the lands out, which is possibly a mistake, because if I draw a Blood Moon, I'm going to want to cast it, and then I'll be down to a single blue mana, which means I can't Snapcaster any blue spells. But that is what I did, and I would do it differently in future. I decided not to attack. I could attack Snapcaster into Matter Reshaper. I don't really want my opponent to draw a card. It would only mean I'm attacking for 2 in future. I'd rather build up a bit more of a force first. My opponent attacks, which is one of those little mistakes. He hasn't really thought about how I'm going to win, and he got a bit overconfident. I think he wants to set up blockers first, or at least see if he's got something blocking, because when my opponent goes for another Matter Reshaper, suddenly I cast Snapcaster Remand, or even Snapcaster Mana Leak, because my opponent can recast it the next turn. So Snapcaster Remand means they're definitely going to have a next turn play. Now I get to attack them for 6, put them to 10. Things are looking a bit better for me. Especially because a lot of my power is wide. I've gone wide in the sense that I have multiple creatures, so they can't block lots of power at the same time. I use Vendilion Clique just to see what's going on. I know that they have I know that they have that Thought Not Seer that I remanded a long time ago. In response, they cast Titan's Presence. They have another one. Now what they reveal is the Thought Not Seer I knew about, a Reality Smasher, and a Spellskite. So that Spellskite's going to be a bit annoying. But the other two I don't currently care about. I'm sure I will at some point, because it's going to be hard to burn my opponent out with Challenge to the Void there. I draw a Molten Rain, and I figure, right, I'm just going to start going for it. So attack with the 2 Snapcasters. I could attack with the 2 Elementals there. I think I probably should have. If they do block, I get my opponent down to 5. Molten Rain puts them on 3, and then I have still have some good attacks. As it happens, I don't, and I regret that, and I'll do it differently in future. My opponent reveals Spatial Contortion off of their Matter Reshaper, which kills a Snapcaster Mage. That's going to be a bit annoying. One thing to note is they have all these creature lands, but actually they're unable to activate them, and they don't really want to trade them off. These would block my creatures very well, but they aren't able to. My opponent isn't able to make good use of them because of their lack of total mana. So I nuke the Mutavault on account of it being a 2/2. The Blinkmoth Nexus is a 1/1 that could become a 2/2 with a lot more mana, but this means my Elementals are going to be able to attack next turn. My opponent draws another Blinkmoth Nexus and makes the Spellskite. Oh no, my mistake. Makes the spatial Contortion. So attack my opponent down to 4. Pass the turn, and I'm running out of cards. Now my opponent makes a Spellskite. Still haven't drawn that land. I draw a Grim Lavamancer. I feel very happy for one moment, and then I remember the Chalice of the Void is there. So my outs are quite low. I remember from my deck that really I've only got these 2 Electrolyze. I've used my Clique, so I've got some Snapcasters, maybe Young Pyromancer. But I've gone through both Molten Rains, really running out of options. I draw. I don't draw yet. My opponent is Warping Wailing to kill an Elemental, so I cannot attack them. So I draw Serum Visions. Again, no good. My opponent draws a Ghost Quarter. Thought Not Seers me. Finally resolves after turn 3 on turn 13, 10 turns later. Sees nothing. I draw nothing. I can't cast that Delver. I take my 4. My opponent makes Ratchet Bomb. I figure that might be to do for 0, although that would kill the Challenge to the Void, so maybe they're about to tick it up to take out a future Young Pyromancer. Electrolyze. Well, that's good. Now, there's a trick with Electrolyze where if you target Spellskite for 1 and your opponent for 1, they can't redirect it. I'm not sure my opponent would want to pay 2 to redirect it or not, but this means that they cannot. And if they have a way of protecting the Spellskite from targeting, I definitely managed to get some damage in and draw my card. I draw a land, and my opponent charges the Ratchet Bomb up 1. This turn I decide to block. The reason is that if my opponent puts me to 4 and they draw a Warping Whale or a Titan's Presence to kill the Elemental, I won't be able to block next turn. So it's just future-proofing myself against my opponent's draws. My opponent makes Thought-Knot Seer, and I'm dead on board. Oh! Electrolyze. My opponent's on 2. They can't Spellskite. So, away it goes. And I win the match. A bit lucky, but there we go.